reality of diversity, to say there is one Islam, but there are many interpretations and many cultures. Let us come to this reality and not to avoid discussion, a critical discussion in the name of something which is a superficial understanding of what uniformity or unity is. I think that this is the wrong way forward.
Great, thank you. John?
Thank you. Now I get the task of being the bad guy. I mean, this is the good cop crew here, and I am the bad guy. This is time for question and answer, and there are some things that I want you to keep in mind. There's a mic there. If you have a question, please come to the mic. When you come, identify yourself briefly. This is not a time for a sermon or a commentary. It is a time for a question. And John and I were talking about it, and there are lots of different opportunities for different kinds of conversations with Tariq. But what is very important at this point, I think, is to have your questions be directed to the topic that we have this afternoon, which is radical reform in Islam and Tariq's position on it. There are lots of other things we can talk with Tariq about at other times, but let's try and be focused. And we have a while, and I have my timekeeper again who will remind me when I say, okay, we've only got time for 2 or 3 more questions, but let's get started.
Thank you, Dr. Ramadan, for coming. My name is Omar Nuraldi, and I'm a senior here at Georgetown. And we read your book, Radical Reform, in Professor Vol's class, and we also read Abdul Karim Saroush's book, and he talked about the difference between religion and religious understanding. And I wanted to know how that was different, or how that plays a role into being able to promote this radical reform if majority Muslims think that what you're doing is changing the religion rather than your understanding of the religion.
I wouldn't say that. For me, there is no religion without understanding of religion. You know, there is something, and this is where we have a problem. The only problem that we have, in fact, with Saroush is really the status of the text and the status of the scriptural sources. Now, for me, the text is saying something. It's not because we are 10 reading the text and that we extract the usul, that it's just a consensus between the scholars that we are reading the text in such a way. I think that as a believer, if there is a text, the text means something, and there are principles here. So these principles are helping us to give us the framework of what a religion is. But this religion and the framework and the principles that are building this religion are going to be understood or translated into our daily life through our human understanding. So in this, what I want to reform, yes, it's the Muslim mindset in the way we deal with the text. But for me, the status of the text remains. It's the very word of God. I think that I am taking this very seriously. I'm taking the tradition very seriously. I think that there is a tradition. Now, and there are principles, and there is something which is a universal dimension and immutable values coming from the text and not coming only from my mind. Now I have no problem, as Abu Hamid al-Ghazali was saying, to understand that the constructions that are coming from my mind are very close to something that could be revealed. He was using in Arabic something which is a very way to put it, is al-aqlu wahyun dakhili, meaning that your intellect is an internal revelation that you can go and try to seek this, consistency between the principles and the world. So on this, we disagree, because I think that this is where there are differences in the way we deal with the scriptural sources and the status of the texts.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Eitan Paul. I'm a sophomore here at Georgetown. Thank you for coming to speak with us. My question is that you spoke about the need to bring together scholars of the text and scholars of context when it comes to considering ethical issues, and that they should be considered on equal footing. But how would you go about bringing them together, and what needs to be done to push that process forward when it comes to considering ethical issues in both the text and the context?
Look, I'm starting to think about it and to try to translate this into reality. First, it's not new in one point, as I told you. In the medical sciences, we have this, and it is working and has been the case for the last 30 years. I'm mentioning this in the first case studies in the book, medical sciences. Now, what we need to do, really, and it's what I want to do now as something which is trying to translate this into a reality, is to push forward what is done in certain, councils in Muslim-majority countries as well as in the West, but have the kind of workshops where you have scholars, Muslim scholars, coming from the East and coming from the West. This is one crossing the board, one dimension. And scholars of the text and scholars of the content in very specific issue, and to come together and to think together. So not something which is far from the media, but deep in the text and deep in the context. When it comes to, I want to do exactly the same, in economy. I have a problem with what we have now. I was recently invited in London to something which was a very big conference around Islamic economy, and I challenged them. And the reaction I got from specialists is that you are right, we feel that there is something missing in the whole process. And it's exactly the same with anything which has to do with women, with arts, with how do we think about this? Is there something that we can call ethics in this field, and how can we promote this with people working in that field? So we have to take some decision here, and we have to push forward. Because there is something which is, to conclude on this, there is something which is already there, which is informal. Informal. You have a kind of informal communication between the two worlds, so to speak, and I think that we have to make it much more organized, institutionalized. I think that if there is something that I'm advocating for the Muslims in the West, but it's also have to be connected to the Muslim-majority countries, is institutionalizing our presence through workshops and understanding of this kind.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ramadan. My name is Sharaf, and I'm from Casablanca. My question to you is, do you think that the political self-interest of Muslim-majority nations has been a hindrance to this radical reform of Islam that we're talking about?
What do you mean exactly?
By political self-interest, I basically mean the governments and the structure that's in place right now. Do you feel that's compatible with a radical reform of Islam? And whether or not it is a hindrance to this?
So implicitly, it's a hindrance, isn't it?
I tried not to make it implicitly that.
Okay.
But,
it was a response through a question. Okay. Of course, in some countries it's very difficult, I think. But I would say that in the field of this, depending on what we are trying to do, it's of course, when you are challenging power and we are challenging the governments, it's going to be very difficult. It's not going to happen. And some countries, they want to have to control the religious authority. My country of origin in Egypt, it's quite clear. You have people who are controlled in what they have to say. Still, there is a room for maneuver in the Muslim-majority countries. Because don't confuse the Muslim-majority countries with only some Arab countries. You were mentioning Malaysia, Indonesia. I was recently in Malaysia. I spoke with some of the scholars in Indonesia, the same, but also in Pakistan and in some Arab country, in Morocco, for example. I met, in the perceived controversial call for a moratorium that I launched in 2003. I went to Tetuan, and I spent hours with 35 scholars. And at the end, they were supporting my point, saying, but we are not going to make it public. And but think about that. It's a very important point. If you want to be serious about reform in the Muslim-majority countries, you have to understand that the public opinion in some of the very sensitive issues, they think that if you touch this, you are destroying Islam. So this is why it's very important sometimes to work far from the media and to come to start an educational process. It has to do with pedagogy. It has to do with understanding. This is something which is very serious. So it's not just to go and to be against the authority or the political authority Of course, they want to